My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 33 years old. And the night everything exploded wasn't when I single-handedly stopped a cyberattack that would have plunged the eastern seaboard into darkness, or when I tracked North Korean hackers through the Pentagon's firewall at 3 a.m. It was Christmas Eve in my sister's Park Slope brownstone, watching her pour $200 wine while my nephew opened his fourth iPad, listening to my own father toast Rachel's real career as a corporate lawyer. To my successful daughter, Dad announced, his voice carrying over Sinatra and fake Snow, who actually made something of herself. 23 relatives applauded. Crystal glasses, designer sweaters, the smell of prime rib that cost more than I made in a week. Unlike Evelyn, he added, looking right through me, still playing with computers in her little cubicle, 33, and nothing to show for it. They laughed. Not cruel, worse. Pitying. Like I was the family charity case they tolerated once a year. Tonight, the truth would come crashing through their privilege like a battering ram. Tonight, they'd learn exactly what happens when you dismiss the person standing between them and chaos. The dining room felt like a courtroom where I'd been sentenced before trial even began. Rachel's brownstone in Park Slope exposed brick, abstract art worth more than my car, a reclaimed wood table for 16, Edison bulbs glowing over bone china that probably had insurance of its own. Christmas Eve, 2023. 23 members of the Carter-Wellington clan gathered to celebrate tradition, hierarchy, and the unspoken rule that put me at the bottom. I sat near the kitchen door, the seat for late arrivals and family disappointments, while Rachel presided at the head of the table in her Reformation dress. Derek, her banker husband, poured $400 Chateau Margaux. Their kids, 6 and 8, ignored prime rib as they unwrapped their third round of iPads. The table sagged under honey-glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, Brussels sprouts with pancetta, Rachel's bourbon pecan pie cooling on marble counters. Everything curated to prove they'd made it. But success in this family had one definition, and I failed it completely. Before we eat, Dad announced, standing in his pressed Brooks Brothers blazer, I want to toast my daughters. A familiar dread pressed on my chest. I gripped my napkin, fingertips calloused from years of coding they'd never understand. First, to Rachel, his voice swelled with pride I'd chased for 33 years. Youngest partner in Morrison and Forster's history. That's real achievement. Applause thundered. Rachel basked in it. Derek beamed. Their kids clapped like trained seals. This was success to them, profitable, prestigious, Instagram-worthy. A real career, Uncle Tom added, glass raised. Something that matters. The implication hung heavy. Real work, not whatever their niece did in a cubicle. And then there's Evelyn, Dad continued, voice dipping into forced optimism. Still, working with computers. Still single at 33. Still playing with toys. Derek cut in with a scalpel laugh. When are you gonna get a real job, Ev? Laughter rippled, not cruel, just dismissive, like I was the family charity case. Jennifer hid a smirk. Aunt Susan whispered. Her husband nodded sympathetically. I just worry about you, Mom said, her voice blending love and disappointment. No husband, no children, no future, just endless nights staring at screens. What kind of life is that? No future. While they built lives in boardrooms and country clubs, I built defenses they couldn't measure in square footage or stock options. What they didn't know what they couldn't was that 48 hours ago I traced Chinese malware across 17 Fortune 500 companies. That last Tuesday I'd worked 16 hours straight keeping Russian hackers out of the FAA's air traffic control. That 3 weeks ago at Fort Meade, I'd stopped North Koreans from breaching America's financial infrastructure while my team lead whispered in my headset, "You're our last line, Evelyn. If you fail, it's Black Monday times 10. I'd stopped it. Alone, at 3 a.m., while they slept safe in their brownstone. But I couldn't tell them. National security laws didn't allow it. All they saw was a computer girl wasting her MIT degree. The thing about Evelyn, Uncle Tom was saying, she never learned to live in the real world, always lost in some digital fantasy. Digital fantasy. While I protected the very systems that kept their fantasy lives running. My phone vibrated once, twice, 3 times in the coded pattern I dreaded since arriving. I slid it from my lap. Caller ID, classified caller, Fort Meade operations. My stomach dropped. "Excuse me," I murmured, pushing back from the table. Conversations carried on like I was already gone. I slipped onto Rachel's back deck. December air slapped my face, sharp with snow and wood smoke. Warm windows glowed across brownstone yards strung with lights worth more than my rent. "Fourth ring," I answered. "Carter." My voice steady, professional. Not the family disappointment. "Evelyn, it's Colonel Hayes." His tone had that razor edge I'd only heard twice before, both times when America was 6 hours from collapse. "Major cyberattack launched 17 minutes ago. Targets, power grid, financial networks, water treatment. This is the big one." Christmas evaporated. Family vanished. All that remained was 300 million Americans, 4 hours from darkness. "Multiple attack vectors," Hayes said, clipped, urgent. "Russian, Chinese, North Korean. Coordinated. Every system's compromised. We need you at Fort Meade, now." "No." Through the glass, my family laughed and toasted, oblivious while the world I guarded burned around them. "I'm in Brooklyn," I said, mind calculating routes and protocols. "I know. Car's 3 minutes out." A pause. Hayes's voice broke slightly. "This is what we trained for. If we lose this one, we lose everything." I looked back through the window, Dad raising his glass, Rachel glowing, Derek droning about markets. My phone buzzed with alerts that meant their world was under siege. They thought I was nothing. They didn't know I was everything between them and chaos. "I'm ready," I said, breath fogging the frozen air. "Send the car." Tomorrow, they'd know. Tomorrow, the world would learn what their failure had been doing while they counted bonuses. But tonight, I had a country to save. The black SUV reached Rachel's street less than a minute after I hung up. I heard at first the low rumble of reinforced engines built for pursuit, not efficiency. Inside, my family was still laughing, still celebrating their version of success, while 300 million Americans slept unaware that their entire infrastructure was under siege. I didn't say goodbye. No explanations. Just grabbed my coat and slipped through Rachel's perfect home like a ghost departing a life that had never been mine. The driver didn't speak when I climbed in. Secret Service, maybe someone who'd seen enough classified nights like this to know silence was protocol. We hit the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway at 90, hidden blue strobes flashing under overpasses. My phone lit up, 17 secure channels exploding at once. Fort Meade, Cyber Command, NSA, even the White House Situation Room. Each alert confirmed what Hayes had said. This was the big one. The nightmare scenario we'd war-gamed for years, praying it would stay theoretical. Through tinted glass, I watched Brooklyn smear into Queens, then the glow of LaGuardia. A Blackhawk waited on the private tarmac, rotors already spinning, flinging snow in sparkling halos. SUV to helicopter took 10 seconds. A crew chief with seal patches hauled me aboard. Then we lifted, banking over the East River as Manhattan's Christmas lights stretched below like a circuit board about to go dark. I caught my reflection in the window. A 33-year-old woman in cashmere and jeans, hair whipping in rotor wash, suspended between two worlds. Behind me, a family who measured worth in billable hours. Ahead, a war most Americans would never know existed. The crew chief handed me a tablet. I opened Hayes's briefing. My stomach dropped. Russian APT groups coordinating with Chinese state actors. North Korean malware providing cover, all hitting at once across 17 critical sectors. Power grids, water treatment, financial networks, air traffic control, hospitals, emergency services. Everything modern civilization relied on was being dismantled in real time. The Blackhawk screamed south at 140 knots, the Northeast Corridor glittering below Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C. cities, with no idea they were 4 hours from collapse. My phone buzzed again. "Rachel, where did you go? Dad's asking about you." The distance between us wasn't miles but universes. She worried about Dad's feelings. I worried about Dad having electricity tomorrow morning. I let the message fade as encrypted updates poured in, each worse than the last. 37 minutes after leaving Brooklyn, we hit Fort Meade. The transition was instant from civilian daughter to national asset. A Cyber Command lieutenant met me on the tarmac, sprinting toward a waiting vehicle. "They're in the skiff," he said. "It's bad. Worse than the briefing." We cleared 3 checkpoints in 90-second scanners, armed guards, biometric locks. Midnight corridors throbbed like arteries under attack. Fluorescent hum, personnel moving with urgent precision, faces drawn tight with national emergency. Then the vault door, 3 feet of steel, retinal, and voice authentication, opening with a hiss that revealed my battlefield. The Strategic Cyber Operations Center. A cathedral of screens 40 feet high, glowing with cascading red and orange code, crisis colors. 50 of America's best cyber warriors hunched at terminals, faces lit by monitors that showed attack vectors multiplying faster than we could track them. The air smelled of coffee, circuitry, and the sweat of invisible war. At the front stood General Marcus Crawford. 4 stars on his shoulders, 3 decades of battle etched into his face. He'd commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, but this was different, an enemy that couldn't be bombed, only outsmarted. Agent Carter. His voice carried the weight of command. Thank God you're here. Dak. I stepped forward. 50 pairs of eyes tracking me, analysts I'd fought alongside, hackers recruited from MIT and Stanford, retirees pulled back because this was the fight we'd always feared. General, I said, steady despite my racing pulse. Situation report. He gestured to the main display. America painted in hostile red. Coordinated strikes launched at 2,047 hours, Crawford said, clipped and precise. 0-day exploits. Russians on the power grid. Chinese actors in financial networks. North Korean malware masking both while they target water, hospitals, emergency services, air traffic control. Each target he named was another blade in my chest. 17 Fortune 500 companies compromised. Critical vulnerabilities across 12 states. Financial anomalies suggest coordinated withdrawals. 50 million Americans could lose power by dawn. The number hung in the air like smoke. They've been inside our systems for months, Crawford continued, and for the first time I heard fear in a 4-star general's voice. Planting backdoors, mapping networks, waiting for tonight Christmas Eve, skeleton crews, maximum distraction. It's brilliant and devastating. I studied the screen's layers of malware worming through systems that kept the country alive. We've thrown everything at them, Crawford said. Our best tools, strongest defenses, nothing works. They anticipate every move, 3 steps ahead. He turned to me, the man who had briefed presidents and stared down dictators without flinching. Evelyn, you're our last line. If you can't stop this, we'll see an infrastructure collapse that makes 9/11 look like a rehearsal. Hospitals powerless, water undrinkable, markets cratering. Riots before New Year's. I moved to my station, my terminal, configured for how I worked, for how I thought about code, as a living enemy to be hunted and destroyed. The chair was still warm from the last analyst's failed attempt. I sat, the weight of 50 people's hopes settling on me like armor I'd trained my whole life to wear. My fingers touched the keys. The family disappointment vanished. The mocked daughter disappeared. What remained was the weapon I had become 15 years sharpening myself into a cyber warrior who thought like the enemy. Give me full access, I said, my voice cutting across the room. Every compromised system, every vector, every piece of malware. I want it all. Crawford nodded. A technician rerouted the flood. My screens filled with terabytes of hostile code, real-time network maps, feeds of infection spreading like a virus through a nation's bloodstream. This was no longer about dignity, or family, or proving anyone wrong. This was survival, millions of lives balanced on whether I could outthink an enemy that had prepared for years. I cracked my knuckles. Calm settled over me, the focus that had carried me through 1,000 smaller battles, now expanded to match the scale of apocalypse. Coffee, I said quietly. It's going to be a long night. Behind me, Crawford exhaled relief mixed with hope. Around me, 50 cyber warriors paused, watching. And on 40-foot screens, America burned in digital flames while enemies celebrated what they thought was their greatest victory. They had no idea who they were up against. They had no idea the mocked daughter, the pitied computer girl, was about to become their worst nightmare. The war had begun, and I was done being invisible. The first line of enemy code hit my screen like tracer fire, fast, brilliant, lethal. But I'd been hunting digital predators long before most of these analysts finished school. I could read malicious code the way shark hunters read blood in the water. 12 entry points. Advanced persistent threats buried for months, maybe years. PhDs in Beijing and Moscow had designed this state-sponsored, patient, precise like chess masters 20 moves ahead. But they'd never faced me. Someone who thought as they did, who had spent 15 years learning to anticipate every strike. My fingers hit the keyboard. The battle began. First move, isolate vectors. I traced malware signatures across 17 networks at once. Russian backdoors in power grids, Chinese Trojans in financial systems, North Korean worms gnawing through hospital databases. Jesus, someone whispered. She's tracking all of them. I tuned it out. Crawford's pacing, the watching eyes, they didn't matter. Only the code mattered. Second move, countermeasures. Custom algorithms I'd built over years came online, predicting attacks, flipping enemy tactics into vulnerabilities. Screens lit up green for stable systems, orange for those under siege, red for breaches. America's survival glowed in colors across 40-foot walls. Ohio grid failing, an analyst shouted. Cleveland, Cincinnati. I see it. My hands never stopped. Deploying firewalls, redirecting vectors back on themselves. Maunder. I could feel them now, the hackers in Moscow, Beijing celebrating what they thought was inevitable victory. They didn't know I recognized their fingerprints in every line. Their brilliance followed patterns I could anticipate in my sleep. Third move, traps. Digital cages that let them think they were winning, while I funneled them into kill zones. It was like 12 simultaneous chess matches, moves unfolding in milliseconds, failure measured in cities going dark. Sweat ran down my spine. Processors screamed under the load, but I kept going. Financial networks collapsing, another analyst cried. Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Hold, I snapped. 30 seconds. 30 seconds to stop economic collapse. 30 seconds to save millions of accounts and the foundations of the U.S. economy. I dug deep, finding the master node buried under 17 layers of encryption, disguised as normal traffic. Brilliant, but not brilliant enough. My countercode struck like a missile, shredding encryption, flipping their malware against them. Within seconds, their financial attack folded in on itself. System stabilizing, the analyst yelled, hope breaking through panic. Relief lasted 2 seconds. Then every screen went red. Klaxons blared. Catastrophe. What is that? Crawford's voice cut sharp. I froze at the code flooding my screen. Their kill switch. A worm more sophisticated than anything before targeting our nuclear early warning systems. They're hitting NORAD, I said. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed calm. If they compromise command and control, no one needed the rest. A false alarm, a broken protocol, World War III sparked by ghosts in the system. Can you stop it? Crawford's hand gripped my chair, leather creaking. The worm spread like cancer, elegant and merciless. This was the real strike. Everything else had been distraction. Now they aimed for annihilation. One chance, one keystroke too slow, and nuclear safeguards collapsed. Not tonight, I whispered. Not on my watch. My fingers flew, building a trap so intricate it should have taken weeks. I had seconds. Seconds to stop nuclear chaos. And I wasn't fighting just for code. I was fighting for every kid sleeping under Christmas lights, every mother who believed tomorrow would dawn safe. For Rachel, Derek, their children. For Dad raising his glass, for Mom worrying about my future, for the family that mocked me, and the millions who would never know how close we stood to darkness. The worm hit my trap. For a heartbeat, everything balanced. Their years of planning against my years of training. Moscow and Beijing against one woman at Fort Meade. Then it collapsed. Imploded, turned inward, devouring itself. My screen flashed green, not warning green victory, system secure, threat neutralized. Silence swallowed the room. 50 people held their breath. Then applause rose, first tentative, then thunderous. Analysts cheered, techs hugged, relief cascading through the Strategic Cyber Operations Center. Crawford's hand landed heavy on my shoulder. His voice was raw. You did it. You actually did it. I leaned back, drenched in sweat, tears on my face I didn't bother to hide. Around me, The room erupted in celebration. My phone buzzed. Rachel again. Seriously, where are you? Everyone's asking. I stared at the words. She worried about etiquette. I'd just stopped nuclear compromise that could have ended civilization. But I couldn't tell her. Couldn't explain. Could only watch as the screens confirmed what millions would never know, that their Christmas morning had been saved by someone invisible. Crawford pulled me aside as the cheering continued. The president wants to brief you. Pentagon's talking Medal of Freedom. What you did tonight, there aren't words. I nodded, too exhausted for words of my own. Outside the vault, I heard staff calling loved ones, telling them they'd be home soon, that it was over. No one would tell their families how close it had come, that their normal Christmas morning had survived only because of shadows, fought by people whose names would never be known. And that was fine. I didn't need recognition, or medals, or handshakes. I just needed the truth I carried, that invisibility was my greatest weapon. The family disappointment had saved the nation. Tomorrow they'd still have no idea. That was the price of being a shield, silent, unseen, unbreakable. And I'd pay it 1,000 times to keep them safe. The news broke at 4:47 a.m. Eastern, 17 minutes after I neutralized the final threat and 3 hours before most Americans would wake to Christmas morning. Breaking. Massive U.S. cyberattack thwarted by single NSA agent. The crawl hit every network at once: CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and international feeds from London to Tokyo, where Christmas Day had already begun. I watched from General Crawford's office in the same cashmere sweater from Rachel's dinner, hands trembling after 8 hours of combat I was too wired to sleep off. The screens showed carefully redacted footage from Fort Meade, enough to tell the story. The agent, whose identity is being withheld for security reasons, prevented what officials are calling the most sophisticated cyberattack in American history. They couldn't withhold it for long. Not with 50 people in that room carrying phones and families and the human need to say they had witnessed the impossible. By 5:15, my name trended. By 5:30, someone leaked my service photo, NSA Blues, flag backdrop, the government issue portrait that made me look like a poster more than a person. By 6, a network connected the dots: MIT classmates, anonymous sources, digital breadcrumbs I'd spent 15 years scattering and covering. A mosaic assembled itself. The family disappointment was the country's firewall. I pictured Rachel's brownstone, coffee brewing, wrapping paper stacked, the 75-inch Samsung flickering alive while they settled in for ordinary Christmas. Instead, they got this. The cyber warrior who saved America's infrastructure is Evelyn Carter, 33, MIT graduate with dual degrees in computer science and cryptography. Sources say Miss Carter has served in the NSA's elite cyber operations division for over a decade, preventing multiple terrorist attacks on American soil. I saw it in my mind. Dad's coffee arrested midair. Mom's hand to her chest. Rachel's composure cracking as footage showed her worthless sister escorted through Fort Meade like someone who mattered. My phone detonated with texts. Rachel, is that really you? Mom, please call. We need to understand. Uncle Tom. My God, I had no idea. I didn't answer. I just watched the storm build, my double life colliding with daylight. At 7 a.m., the ceremony aired live from Fort Meade's main conference room. I stood at attention as General Crawford approached with a medal case almost incongruous against my sweater. His voice carried the weight of official history. Agent Carter, on behalf of the United States of America and the National Security Agency, I present you the Distinguished Intelligence Medal for extraordinary heroism in defending our nation against unprecedented cyber warfare. He pinned it to my chest. Then the 4-star general saluted. A veteran of 3 wars honoring a woman in civilian clothes who had spent Christmas Eve being laughed at by her own family. Every officer in the room rose. 50 hands raised in precise salute, honoring a war most Americans would never see. Cameras caught the moment vindication turned into something larger. Recognition that some battles are fought in silence by people whose names would remain unknown if not for the catastrophe they prevented. Crawford's voice turned outward, into living rooms and kitchens across the country. Last night, Agent Carter saved more than infrastructure. She saved the faith ordinary Americans have in waking to a world that works, Children sleeping under Christmas lights, parents planning holiday mornings, grandparents expecting to call their families without fear. Tears pressed behind my eyes. I refused to let them fall, not here, not now, not with 300 million witnesses meeting their invisible defender for the first time. And she did it, Crawford said, while her own family thought she was wasting her life, while people who should have known her worth measured it in spreadsheets and social posts. Applause broke thunderous, sustained, the sound of a room realigning its idea of heroism. They wanted me to speak. I saw it in faces turned toward me, felt it in the room's breathless attention, and in the cameras that would magnify every syllable. I stepped to the mic, the metal cool against my sweater, 15 years of silence rising to the surface. All my life, I began, voice steady, I've been told my work was small, that no one would care about battles fought behind screens instead of on fields everyone could see. I looked into the lens knowing my family was there, finally seeing. But last night taught me this. Heroism isn't visibility. It isn't applause or recognition or achievements calibrated to impress strangers at dinner. The room went quiet as a cathedral. Heroism is standing between darkness and light when no one's watching. Choosing service over recognition. Protection over popularity. Duty over the approval of people who may never grasp what you've given up. Strength rose in my voice, fed by a lifetime of jokes and lowered eyes. They mocked me for being invisible. Invisibility was my advantage. While success was measured in titles and posts, we were preventing disasters that would have defined generations. Officers nodded. Some blinked back tears. They knew the currency of anonymity. I don't need apologies, I said, feeling a hinge in my life swing open. I don't need understanding or revised judgments. My worth was never theirs to weigh. I glanced at Crawford, the medal, the flag. My worth is counted in children who will wake to warmth and light, in hospitals that will keep breathing for their patients, in markets that won't collapse, in families who'll open presents without knowing how close we came to losing everything. Applause returned rolling, insistent. People stood. Some saluted again. Others just stared as if fixing the moment in memory. So, for anyone told their dream is small, their work doesn't matter, their contribution is invisible, I paused, letting the words find their mark. Know this. The most important battles are often fought by people no one notices. The greatest heroes choose service over recognition. Courage isn't being seen. It's being willing to be unseen so others can live in the light. The standing ovation lasted long enough for phones across America to vibrate with shares and reposts. The clip went viral before I left the podium. But the image that stuck the one newspapers ran and academies would study was the last shot. Me silhouetted against monitors showing a stable grid, steady comms, quiet networks. The flag behind me. The metal catching light. In the screen's reflection, not the punchline from a Christmas table, but a protector, a shield that held when everything else threatened to break. That night, 300 million Americans slept safely because of choices made in darkness. Families gathered without knowing the knife edge we'd stood upon. Children opened gifts under lights that stayed on because I had refused to let them go dark. And somewhere in Brooklyn, under tasteful garlands that cost more than rent, my family finally realized their failure had been the difference between Christmas morning and national collapse. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need a revised ledger of my worth. The truth was simple. While some measured success by wine labels and job titles, I had been saving the world they took for granted. The girl mocked at family dinners had become the woman her country called hero. Between the ovation and the hum of servers guarding the nation's nervous system, that transformation felt less like a twist of fate than a homecoming into a purpose I'd always been meant to serve. Dad's voice echoed from memory. Evelyn, when will you do something that matters? Tonight, Dad. Tonight I did something that mattered more than you'll ever understand. And I did it invisible, unrecognized, alone, exactly how real shields are meant to stand. Evelyn's story reminds us that worth isn't defined by family approval at holiday dinners, that the most critical battles are fought by people working in silence, and that true heroism often means never receiving the recognition you deserve because keeping people safe matters more than being seen. Subscribe for more stories of unsung heroes, the defenders working in shadows, the protectors who'll never make headlines, the everyday warriors whose courage shows up in ways most people will never recognize. Share this story with someone who needs to know. Being invisible doesn't mean being insignificant. Sometimes the greatest strength is protecting people who'll never know your name. The most important battles are fought by people no one notices.